All right, so we're going to dive right into this whole potential U.S. government shutdown thing, looming right before Christmas. And you guys have sent in articles from Axios, The Guardian, even some international takes on this. We've got a lot to get through. But what's fascinating right off the bat is how this isn't your typical political gridlock.
Yeah.
You've got President Trump, fresh from being elected,
Mm-hmm.
frustrated, House Speaker Johnson, and even Elon Musk jumping in. It's
Definitely a recipe for a holiday season nobody expected.
yeah.
So to understand how we got here, we need to rewind a bit. Just days ago, Congress seemed ready to pass that bipartisan stopgap spending bill.
Right, the one to keep the government funded until like mid-March 2025.
Right.
And it included, disaster aid for those hurricane-stricken states,
Yeah.
funding for various government agencies, and a congressional pay raise. They're first since 2009, by the way.
Yeah.
Definitely raised some eyebrows. No surprise there. But the crucial part here is the timing. This bill was designed to give that incoming Trump administration time to set their own budget. It seemed like a done deal. So we had a plan, bipartisan support, seemingly smooth sailing. Yet here we are on the brink of a shutdown. Didn't we just dodge one back in September? Why are we back in this situation?
Well, passing a spending bill,
Yeah.
especially with a divided Congress, it always involved this very delicate dance. But this time, President-elect Trump really threw in a curveball by rejecting the bill.
Ah, yes. That statement calling it a, quote, betrayal of our country, unquote, and urging Republicans to be, quote, smart and tough. That really put Speaker Johnson in a tight spot.
Absolutely. Just imagine trying to appease both your own party and the incoming president who's essentially calling for your carefully negotiated bill to be trashed. It's a political tightrope walk.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
And then, as if things weren't complicated enough, Elon Musk enters the fray.
Right. The Musk factor definitely adds a whole new dimension. And it's important to remember, he is a close ally of Trump and also the co-chair of his newly formed Department of Government Efficiency. They're calling it DOGE.
DOGE, I like it. Catchy. But let's talk about Musk's role in all of this. He publicly condemned the bill, even called it criminal, and then urged his massive following on X, all 207 million of them, to vote out anyone who supports the bill. That's putting a lot of pressure on GOP lawmakers, especially those aligning themselves with the MAGA wing of the party.
Yeah, it really is. And it's a prime example of how individuals with these enormous platforms, like Musk, can wield significant political influence outside of the traditional structures.
It's fascinating, and it gets even more interesting when you consider Musk's wealth. I mean, he's the world's richest man and has a history of backing political causes he believes in. Now, this MAGA wing you mentioned, for those of us who might need a refresher, what are their core beliefs? And how do those beliefs play into their opposition to this spending bill?
Right, so the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, which gained prominence during Trump's previous presidency, generally advocates for a reduction in government spending, particularly on social programs, and a more isolationist approach to foreign policy.
So considering those beliefs, it makes sense that they'd be wary of the spending increases in this bill. They're echoing Musk's concerns about wasteful spending.
Exactly. And this internal division within the Republican Party,
Yeah.
it further complicates the situation. It's not a unified front, which makes predicting their next move pretty difficult.
And meanwhile, the Democrats, who negotiated this bill in good faith, are now accusing Republicans of trying to sabotage the government and hurt working-class Americans. They see this as a betrayal, especially since they thought they had a bipartisan agreement.
And that sentiment, it really underscores the deep partisan divisions and lack of trust between the two parties. It really highlights how fragile these negotiations can be, particularly when external forces like Musk's intervention come into play.
Right, because this wasn't just your typical back and forth. This was supposed to be a done deal, and then suddenly it wasn't.
Exactly. And now the clock is ticking.
It is. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at what could happen next and what the potential consequences might be for the country. Stay with us.
Yeah, it's a tense situation for sure. As of now, with a deadline just days away, the outcome is still uncertain. There are a few potential scenarios that could unfold, though.
Okay, so let's walk through those. What's the best case scenario here?
Well, ideally, Congress could pull off a last-minute miracle and pass a revised spending bill. One that addresses the concerns raised by Trump, Musk, and the conservative Republicans. This would require some significant compromise from both sides, but it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
So like a mad dash to find some common ground before the clock runs out. Sounds like classic Washington maneuvering. But what happens if they can't bridge that divide? What are the other possibilities?
Well, if a compromise can't be reached, they might cave to the pressure from Trump and Musk and just pass a short-term funding bill. This would avert a shutdown for now, but it essentially keeps the can down the road, leaving those bigger budget battles for the incoming Trump administration to grapple with.
So delaying the inevitable, that doesn't seem like a very sustainable solution. It feels like it just sets the stage for another showdown further down the line.
Exactly. And that leads us to the worst-case scenario. The U.S. government shuts down for Christmas, non-essential services would grind to a halt, federal employees would be furloughed, and it would cause widespread disruption across the country.
I can already see the headlines. Government Grinch steals Christmas, shutdown throws holiday plans into chaos.
Yeah.
But beyond the catchy headlines, what would a shutdown actually mean for everyday Americans? What would be the real-world impact?
Well, the impacts can be pretty far-reaching, and they really depend on the duration of the shutdown. National parks and museums would close. Processing of passports and visas could be delayed, potentially impacting travel plans. We could even see disruptions to air travel and food safety inspections. The longer it drags on, the more widespread and significant the consequences become. And you have to think about those who rely on government services. For example, SNAP benefits, commonly known as food stamps, could be disrupted, impacting vulnerable families, especially during the holidays.
It's a pretty bleak picture, and to think all of this stems from a spending bill. Initially designed to provide disaster relief and keep the government functioning smoothly, the irony is almost painful.
It really is. And it highlights how quickly things can unravel in politics, especially when you factor in strong personalities and shifting power dynamics.
Let's take a step back and look beyond this immediate crisis for a second. This whole shutdown drama, if it's any indication, could be a preview of what we can expect with the new Trump administration and a potentially emboldened conservative wing of the Republican Party.
That's a key point. The events of this week, they raise crucial questions about how this new administration will operate. Will they favor compromise and negotiation, or will we see more of these hardline stances and brinkmanship tactics?
And what role will figures like Elon Musk play in shaping policy and political discourse? His involvement in the spending bill debate is a fascinating development. Some people argue that it's a dangerous precedent for unelected individuals with vast wealth to hold such sway over political decisions. Others might say he's simply exercising his right to free speech and political engagement. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
It really is, and it's a debate that goes beyond this particular situation and speaks to the broader question of what role wealth and influence should play in a democracy.
This whole saga has been like watching a political thriller unfold in real time. It's got high stakes, clashing personalities, an unclear ending, and the clock is ticking.
It is, and that's what makes it so compelling. We're witnessing a pivotal moment in American politics.
Right.
And the decisions made in the coming days could reverberate for years to come.
So as we move closer to that Friday deadline, what should we be paying attention to? What are the key things to watch for as this story continues to develop?
Well, first and foremost, keep an eye on how Congress navigates these final hours before the deadline. Will they manage to pass some version of the spending bill? Or are we headed for a shutdown?
Right, because that will be a clear indicator of how much influence Trump and figures like Musk have over the Republican Party.
Exactly. And beyond that, pay close attention to the messaging coming from both sides of the aisle. How are they framing their arguments? Who are they appealing to? These details can reveal a lot about the underlying power dynamics and strategies at play.
It's like we need to become political detectives, reading between the lines and decoding the signals to understand what's really going on.
Precisely. And as this situation unfolds, think about the bigger picture. How might this impact the relationship between the executive and legislative branches? What does this tell us about the future of bipartisan cooperation? These are questions worth considering as we head into this new era of American politics.
Okay, so we need to be watching for a deal, a shutdown, or a temporary fix that just postpones the showdown. We need to analyze the messaging and the arguments coming from both sides to understand the motivations and strategies involved. And on top of all of that, we need to be thinking about the long-term implications for how our government functions.
You got it. It's a lot to keep track of. But that's why we're doing this deep dive, to equip you with the knowledge and context to make sense of this complex situation.
And on that note, we've reached the end of the segment of our deep dive. But don't go anywhere, because there's still more to explore.
We've laid out the key players, the potential scenarios, and the big questions looming over this whole saga. But now it's up to you to connect the dots and form your own conclusions.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here, but for those of us who want to keep following this as it all plays out, where should we be looking? What are the best sources to stay informed?
Well, Given the potential for an actual government shutdown, this is going to be all over the news for the next few days. Any reputable news source will be covering it extensively. However, I really encourage you to go beyond just the headlines. Look for analysis and commentary from different perspectives. There are lots of outlets that dig deeper into what's motivating the key players and explore those potential long-term consequences of the decisions being made.
Right. Like you said before, we got to be political detectives here. It's easy to just get caught up in the horse race aspect of it all. But it's important to step back and think about the bigger picture. This isn't just some game. It has real consequences for real people.
Exactly. And as you follow the news, don't just passively take it all in. Really engage with it critically. Question those assumptions. Consider the different viewpoints and any potential biases.
And maybe even have some good discussions with friends and family, as long as everybody keeps it civil, of course.
Absolutely. Civil discourse is so important, especially now when things are so tense politically. It's through those conversations that we sharpen our understanding and contribute to a more informed public.
This whole deep dive has been a wild one, from almost having a bipartisan deal to the possibility of a Christmas shutdown, the power dynamics shifting within the Republican Party, the influence of people like Elon Musk. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to think about. We've talked a lot about the people in this whole drama, but think about the system itself for a second. Is this how our government is supposed to work? Is this level of uncertainty and brinkmanship really sustainable long term? These are questions that go beyond this specific bill and get to the very core of our democracy.
Big questions for sure, but important ones for us to consider. We can't just sit back and watch this happen.
I agree. At the end of the day, the future of our democracy relies on us being informed and engaged citizens. It's up to all of us to stay informed, to think critically, and to participate in a meaningful way.
Well said. We've given you the info, the context, and the tools to make sense of it all. Now it's your turn to figure out what you think.
Stay curious, stay engaged.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.